And it starts off with using a graphing calculator. We can do this one using a graphing calculator or without. Some of you have your graphing calculators. And some of you only can use Desmos at home. So if you take out your graphing calculator, what you could do is you could type this in, but when we go to type in a graph, we have to go to y equals, and in a graphing calculator, it's exactly that. The only way you can write it in is if it is y equals. So we have to go back and do some changes. How do I get y by itself? I'm not going to make the mistake this time, because we saw it last time. Whoops, I did make a mistake. I'm going to subtract 2x on both sides, subtract 11 on both sides, start to get y by itself. I'd have to divide by a negative. It's nice that the textbook is really making us practice that divide by a negative. So we get 2/3 x plus 11 over 3. Now, for those of you that have a graphing calculator, if you have a newer version of the graphing calculator, what's really nice is if you hit the alpha button, you are able to access F1, F2, F3, and F4. And if you push y equals, the very first one lets you write fractions just like you would like to write fractions. It's not wrong if you do 1 divided by 3, but sometimes it is really nice if you can write 1/3 like that. So our equation that we got was 2/3. Beautiful. So we'll go replace that with 2/3 x. Is it plus or was it minus? Plus 11/3. So again, I could do that alpha y equals, and I could write my 11/3 just like you see. So if you have that fraction button, get used to using it because it makes your life easier. It also means that you'll type less things wrong into your calculator. Now, when you hit graph right now, what it does is it graphs just the line. What are we wanting to do? We're wanting to graph when it's less than. So you get an idea of the line, right? If you have this option, just drag your calculator picture to your notes. It's really nice. We have this line, and where would we want to shade it? We'd want to shade it below, because its y is less than. Also, technically, this line should be dotted, right? I mean, there are ways on the graphing calculator. I can make it dotted. I can do, there's an inequalities program. If you go into the applied course next year, they use it quite a bit for shading. But for us, as a pre-calculus class, we're mainly going to be graphing this by hand and then going about shading. I think I feel like purple crayon. And we're going to shade below. On the graphing calculator, I can show shading below. If I go back to the y equals and I scroll over to this part, I can push enter on it once. This is what kind of line would you like? You can shade above, you can shade below. Okay. And now when I graph, it shades it below as well. I don't know if that's extra helpful to see it on the graphing calculator, because for the most part, you're going to have to graph something and shade it on your own. Okay? Now, this one is a little bit messy, right? If you were graphing this by hand, why is it a little bit messy? What is our y-intercept? When x is 0, you have 11/3. That's not really that much fun to work with. Okay? If I was labeling another point, I would probably label my x-intercept. A reminder, how do we find an x-intercept? Set y equal to 0. So if I plug in 0 for y, and I solve this equation, I'm going to get 2x equals -11. Not the nicest points. So graphing this one could be a little bit more difficult. Well, not more, just more of a hassle, more annoying. Remember we talked about that earlier? That at this point in your math career, dealing with fractions should be a normal thing, but maybe more annoying, just because it takes longer. But it's not necessarily harder, because your skills are already there. So we've got our 2 points. If I found those 2 points and I drew the dotted line, and I didn't rearrange this, can you notice that in this form, it's not easy to tell if you should shade above or below, because the y is not by itself. This is where the test point could be really nice. And again, I would probably use 0, 0. If I plug in 0, I would get 0 plus 0 plus 11. Is 11 bigger than 0? Yes. So that would tell us to shade in this area as well. So now we have sort of 2 ways of going about figuring out which one to shade. Some students like to try both methods as a check. Okay? What happens if our methods are conflicting with each other? One method tells you to shade above, the other method tells you to shade below. Well, it's probably you made some mistake somewhere. Maybe you forgot to flip the sign. Right? If you were solving and divided by -3 and forgot to change the inequality, that would totally change where you shade stuff. So sometimes it's nice to have a secondary method as a check to see if we're making an error somewhere. Okay, so in your questions, I would like you to circle 6, 8, and 13.